Welcome back to Inside Biotech. I'm your co-host, Riley Conover-Elmer. For those who may be new, Inside Biotech is brought to you by BCLA, a nonprofit organization dedicated to inspiring, educating, and connecting emerging scientists and entrepreneurs to help grow and diversify the biotech ecosystem in Los Angeles. On this podcast, we invite you inside one of the fastest growing sectors in Southern California. Here, we bridge science with storytelling to bring you the most novel, up-to-date, and thrilling news on the biotech world in SoCal. If you want to stay informed about current progress and developments in the biotech industry, you're in the right place. Twice a month, my co-host Karishma Chugani and I sit down with scientists, founders, investors, and industry leaders to explore the cutting-edge work happening inside their companies and to share diverse perspectives from across niches and career stages in biotech. Today, we are going to be tackling a topic that is close to my professional development heart, and that is giving an effective scientific presentation. Now, when you think of the most memorable scientific presentations that you've had, I'm sure on one hand, there's a guest lecture or a seminar that you went to that was really impactful. You really connected with the material, you understood what they were trying to say, and maybe you felt empowered or encouraged to adjust your research or to try a new step that you hadn't previously thought of. And on the other hand, I'm sure that there's other memorable presentations that you've been to that have been hard to understand. Maybe you thought that they might as well have been speaking in a different language, or an awkward encounter when someone asked a question at the end. All of these things that we would want to avoid. My goal for today is to just give you a few quick tips that will help you both as you're building your presentation and while you're giving it. The goal of this is to help your presentation be more effectively communicated to your audience and to just better communicate your science in general. The way I've structured this episode is dividing it into two different parts. So the first will be taking some practical tips from slide decks and fonts and figures, things like that. And then secondly, we're going to talk about building your presence as a scientific communicator. Let's dive in. My first tip happens way before you even start your presentation. This is what I learned as a lab tech when I saw postdocs and grad students using PowerPoint or whatever they used for slides, and they would save all of their data, keeping almost like a lab notebook, but through these data PowerPoints. Whenever they created even like semi-finished versions of a figure, they would all go in this PowerPoint and they would save them by project or even by week. And it made it really easy when it was time to give a presentation. That way, if you have a list of all of your PowerPoints that have all of your figures, when it comes time to give a scientific presentation, you can just copy and paste from all of your different projects and find what you need much more quickly than having to rerun scripts to create figures. The second tip I have goes along with this, and it's using the most amount of figures and pictures to guide your slides as possible. This will be a lot more impactful for your audience because if they're seeing a little bit of text combined with a figure or a diagram, it is way more likely to stick in their minds. You can find pictures or diagrams from previously published work, make sure that you cite them appropriately, or just from the internet, you can use something like Canva to create a diagram if you can't find what you're looking for, or you can use things like BioRender are also helpful ways to create scientific diagrams. My third tip is that an overwhelming slide leads to an overwhelmed audience and a disengaged audience. So when you are creating a slide, you want to limit yourself to 1 to 2 figures per slide. I know that we've all sat and we've looked at a 8-part figure and you have no idea what the labels, the X and Y axes even are because the font is so tiny so that they could get everything on the slides. And we don't want that. We want it to flow easily so they know what they're looking at. So you can easily guide them, say this figure on the left, this is what it shows, this is the important takeaway from it, now the figure on the right, and then you can move them through it that way. Otherwise, it will be a lot easier for your audience to disengage. So keep your slides simple and reduce the amount of text, reduce the amount of figures, and try and just keep it as concise as you can. Another tip here is to put in the title of your slide the key takeaway. So whether they were to read nothing on your slide except for the title, they would be able to understand the gist of that section of your presentation. My last tip here is about acronyms. And across all scientific disciplines, the acronym is used to shorten big, long scientific terms, whether it's a technique, a protein, a drug name, you name it. There is a long term for it, and it's a lot easier to shorten the acronym, especially when talking about methods and trying to move things along as you're explaining, trying to just get to your results as fast as you can. There is one common mistake that I see scientists make over and over again with their acronyms, and it's only defining the acronym one time, and it's usually in passing. Sometimes when you use the acronym, especially if it's a technique or if you're using multiple acronyms across the same presentation, your audience members need a little bit of a refresher throughout the presentation. If you just say it one time at the beginning and you're only referring to the acronym for the rest of the time, a very limited number of people are going to be able to follow and know what you're referring to if there are no context clues or other ways for them to understand what you're actually referring to. There's a few different ways that you can address this in your presentation. A, reduce the number of acronyms in your presentation. 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 can be okay if they're contextualized and they're easy to follow in terms of getting to your results. But if it's very complex and it's very important to understand, but if that acronym is something representative of something critical to understanding your methodology or research, it might be better to just use the full name. And that can be either written on your slides or it can be you talking and just using the full name as you're talking in the presentation. Or B, you could always just put at the bottom of the slide the acronym and what it means and what it refers to, like EEG, electroencephalography. And that way, if they're completely unfamiliar with your research, they at least have a little bit more context and can Google it later. Especially because across scientific disciplines, acronyms can mean certain things to certain people and then different things to different people. So you really want to make sure that those are clear and that you're using your acronyms wisely. Another tip I am going to give here is to have someone else check your work. Even if it's for a shorter presentation, it doesn't necessarily need to be your mentor, but that's always helpful if they have time to look it over. But a peer or a coworker can make a big difference. I have a little bit of a story from this. It happened just a couple of weeks ago, and I was actually really sick for a couple of days and had to give a presentation on that Friday afternoon. And so I had stayed up all night Thursday making it because I had just felt so sick. The next day, I went to give the presentation, didn't have a chance to have anyone else look it over, but I gave the presentation, felt pretty good about it, and answered some questions. We had a good discussion. At the end, I got an email. I usually get email feedback from my mentor anyways. That's just always like, you did this great. Next time you can work on this. And it's just a good way for me to get instant feedback. But in her email, she said, "Good job, Riley. Loved the discussion and your presentation flowed really well. One minor thing to note is that every slide that said results on it, you had actually misspelled and you had switched the L and the U. So every space that it was supposed to say results, it actually said results. And just a minor thing, but something to be aware of, double checking your spelling in your presentation." And I was mortified, but it does happen. Like, these minor grammar spelling checks do go a long way. And if someone else could have just looked it over and noticed for me, it would have saved me a little bit of embarrassment. So it does happen. It happens at all stages of careers. I've heard stories from other people that are more senior than I am. And so don't stress out about it too much if it does happen. But that can be avoided with someone being able to double check your work. All right, now let's move to the presentation side. Public speaking can be scary for a lot of people. If you are someone that is uncomfortable with public speaking, you are not alone. Especially scientists, especially people working on projects that are so near and dear to their heart that they have such a investment in. It makes sense that this is something you want to communicate effectively and well, and with that comes a lot of pressure. There are some tips that I've used that might be able to alleviate some of that pressure, as well as give you confidence and sound more professional when you are communicating your science. The first tip here is obvious. You have to know who you're speaking to. This is, I'm sure, one of the first things that anyone will tell you about giving a scientific presentation. Know who your audience is. If you are presenting to your guidance committee that'll have sort of an idea of what you're doing, but have varying degrees of expertise and are contributing different things to your career path, then if you're giving a presentation at a large summit to people that are completely outside your domain of scientific expertise, you want to keep this in mind both when you're creating your slides for the presentation and also when you're presenting. There's a couple questions that you might want to ask yourself. Are they familiar with my specific domain of expertise? For example, I am in developmental neuroscience. Do people that I work with understand neuroscience more broadly? Or are we getting people from other biological sciences or ecologists or veterinary scientists? And if they are within neuroscience, do they use the same techniques that I do? Are they more lab scientists, bench scientists, or are they computational? All of these are going to have varying degrees of understanding of what you do, and that will adjust the amount of background and the amount of methodology explanations you need to go through before you can really show how impactful your results are. Usually the background and the methods, those are sort of a means to an end so that you can get to the result. But if you don't provide the necessary background and understanding, it is going to be really easy for your audience to disengage later when you're talking about the results. So getting a good understanding of what your audience may or may not know is going to shape how you can structure your presentation to make your results the most impactful. Another tip that I have here is that you have been researching this topic for months or years. This may even be your life work. So when you show up to present it, be proud of it. I've seen way too many scientists that get up and either because of nerves or apathy, or they've just given the presentation so many times, but they seem disengaged with their own work before they've even presented it to you. When you do this, if you have a hard time with your tonality or expressing that excitement, there's a couple things that might help with that. One simple thing is to smile. When you start smiling, that indicates a positive sign to your audience, and they can also sort of mimic that excitement and enthusiasm that you have. Fluctuating your tone as well, instead of keeping it at the same pitch the entire time. If you can practice going through adjusting your tone, your pitch, higher, lower, find a couple of points in your presentation, and you might have to practice this, where you can fluctuate the pitch or tone of your voice to match the excitement or the mood or the takeaway that you want your audience member to get. For example, maybe you're starting out your introduction with a case study of a certain patient that had developed disease that is now curable or that you are now working on. Find inflection points there that can help draw the audience in, and with your facial expressions and with your tonality, they're going to be able to see your passion and excitement for the project. Another tip that I have here is to know your slides, know what's coming next. Even if you don't have every single slide memorized, if you are going through, clicking through slides and you have no idea what's coming next, the audience can usually pick up on that. So you need to have a very good idea of the flow of your presentation before you even get started. That will allow the flow of your presentation, and that will boost your confidence and drastically improve the flow and stability as you move forward. This is another tip that can go along those same lines. If you are up there, it means you have enough credibility as a speaker to convey new scientific information. You are the expert when you are giving a presentation, and you want to ensure that credibility throughout the entirety, including before and after questions. Sometimes even minor comments, like when you're clicking through a slide and maybe you forgot that you had added a figure, saying things like, I forgot that was there, or didn't mean to put that there, or that's a surprise to me too. Those can be kind of funny to the audience, but you also run the risk of damaging your credibility. So just be aware that you still want to come across as an expert, even if you find other ways to make it lighthearted, such as if there's technical difficulties, those are other ways that you can go with the flow, but you still want to maintain your credibility and professionalism. All right, my last tip here is about handling the Q&A. There are always going to be a few people that enjoy the question and answer section as a way to impose their own credibility and expertise. Unfortunately, that is not what it is for. The question and answer section should really be a chance to clarify any of the work, potentially pose some new ideas or considerations or future directions, or to complement your presentation and how well of a job that you did. This should not be the place for criticism or scholarly debate. So if you are having a question and answer section, please don't take the time to turn this into a debate. If you are giving a presentation and a question turns south, I know that you know what I'm talking about. It can be really easy to clam up and get nervous and your fight or flight goes on. If this does happen to you, there's a few tips that have helped me. Number one, you don't have to answer immediately. You can take a breath, you can think for a minute, and sometimes that gives you the opportunity to conduct a good response. Secondly, you do not always have to engage with that question. If there's a strong indication that maybe the question wasn't asked in good faith, or it was more just to give them a chance to tell about what they know, you do not always have to engage. You can remain professional and kind. You never have to feel like you have to answer a question that makes you uncomfortable or that you genuinely would rather handle outside of the presentation. You can always thank them for their comment, ask to continue the conversation outside of the presentation, and then move on to a different comment. Additionally, sometimes you're asked a question that comes out of left field that was asked in good faith, but it's so far outside of your realm of expertise, or you just don't know the answer to the question. Maybe you're new in training and you're still getting a grasp on the methods or what the current field views on a topic. In this case, it is always helpful to be honest, especially if you are a trainee. It is a sign of intelligence and humility if you're able to say, I think that that's a great question. I haven't considered that, and I'm not quite as familiar with that side of the field as your question allows. So I would love to do more research and, again, continue this conversation outside of the presentation. And then you can always add, what I do know is, and you try and find a way that sort of bridges their question with something in your field that you do know and understand and can speak to. Even if it's not quite as relevant, it can still, again, show that credibility while you are still honest about maybe needing to do some more research, or it allows you to show that intelligence and humility while being open to learning new information and being taught some things that could lead to a future direction or a new part of your scientific experiments, which is, again, the whole point is to spark this dialogue and to get ideas generating between you and other scientists. All right. Hopefully some of these ideas were helpful for you. Maybe a couple of them were new. Maybe you already knew most of them. But otherwise, I can't wait to see your scientific presentations in action. Let me know if there's anything that you would add. And if these helped you and you give a scientific presentation in the future, please reach out to us. I would love to see how these are being implemented in the real science world. Thank you so much for watching, and we're excited for these next few episodes that are going to be rolling out over the next couple of months. You're going to want to check them out. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week, and we will catch you soon. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Inside Biotech, hosted by Riley Conover-Elmer and Karishma Chugani. Inside Biotech is produced by Biotech Connection Los Angeles. I would like to thank our production team, Stephanie Wu, Serena Gao, Brian Jimenez, Daniel Arce, Danielle Liu, and thank you to our sponsors, Magnify at CNSI, USC Bridge Institute, KGI, LA Biospace, Technova, and Amgen for their support. For more information about upcoming BCLA events, visit bc-la.org or find us on social media at Inside Biotech. If you are interested in partnering with Inside Biotech as a sponsor or speaker, please contact our team at bc-la.org. We invite you to follow us on your preferred podcast service, and please leave a 5-star review. We'll see you next time.